and welcome to my book review for Black Box by Shiori Ito. This is a nonfiction memoir about a woman who was raped in Japan, and largely it focuses on her pain, her experiences after the assault, and her experience within the Japanese justice system and how she felt victimized and ignored by specifically the justice system. She details her assault, she details what took place after, how she told people about it. The man who assaulted her was a very powerful man in Japan who had a lot of high up friends who protected him, and this book is essentially her statement to the world, just explaining what she went through and what the situation was like for her. I gave this 4 stars. I thought this was a wonderful book. This was recommended to me by Mianacorn at the Bookish Land, so I will link her down below, and I will try to find her video where she talks about this book. But this was so wonderful and highly worthwhile. I really enjoyed it and would highly recommend if you're capable of reading something as emotional and difficult as this, because this was a really hard book that hurt to read. One of the first things that struck me in this book is how defensive Ito is about herself and all of her actions and her family and her friends and her thoughts, and literally every small detail she feels the need to defend it in this book. And I don't mean that as a negative for the book at all. I feel like that's so illustrative of the situation, of what she's been put through. Her first instinct for everything is to explain herself away and to explain why she did everything, to justify every little action. At one point her mother was angry. This was the point that I noticed it the strongest, and that I sort of realized the whole book felt like this. Her mother said she wanted to kill the man who raped her. Just when she heard about it, her first response was, oh my gosh, I want to kill that man. It's horrible that he did that to you. And she spends about a paragraph explaining that her mother didn't literally mean that her mother would never physically harm anybody, and that it was just an emotional moment. And it kind of hurt my soul. That's not a place people get to on their own. Everything she went through within the justice system, within the police force, and going through so many interviews and having to physically recreate her rape with a dummy while police officers took pictures, and being questioned by the media and accused in the media after she came forward after the investigation. It was basically announced that they weren't going to do anything. She went to the press to share her story there, and it really did hurt. You could just see how all of those accusations just led her to second guess herself and have to just explain away even the tiniest details that, you wouldn't really think twice about before you've been traumatized like this. That part really stuck out to me emotionally. This book also felt kind of like a police investigation. She spends a lot of time questioning witnesses, going over the evidence, sending emails to the man who assaulted her, trying to get him to incriminate himself. And she spends a lot of time putting these pieces together because she doesn't trust the police after what they've put her through. And she feels like no one else is going to do this for her, so she needs to put together the case herself. She doesn't understand why the police aren't interviewing some of these witnesses. If there are people in the hotel who saw her, potentially drugged out of her mind and not able to stand, then why didn't the police, interview them? And she spends so much time going over all the evidence herself and putting it together and proving her case in a way. And I really enjoyed that. I read Chanel Miller's book, Know My Name, last year, and it was a similar topic about a woman who'd been assaulted and just her telling her story, but in a very different way. Whereas that book focused on the justice system after the fact as well, but also a lot of it was very emotional and very just about Chanel Miller's current state. This book was kind of the opposite, where it was she was trying so hard to focus on the facts to tell her story. She didn't feel like people would believe her, so she's showing all of this evidence to prove her case, and that really hurt as well. And again, in contrast to Chanel Miller's book, so much of this felt kind of dispassionate almost. And again, I don't mean that in a bad way. That kind of hurt more, when someone is telling you a story about a really painful event they went through, but they're using kind of dry, objective, distant language. Like they're distancing themselves from their own trauma. That's kind of what this felt like at points, and it just, for me, made it hit so much harder. Like she's just not focusing on her emotions. I mean, she does talk about her feelings at a lot of points in this book, but it didn't feel like the main focus like it did in Know My Name. This was so much just the bare bones of her case, of her feelings, of telling her story, and it was more so about the justice system. This whole book reads like an indictment on the Japanese justice system and the way they treat rape victims. Like the way she was treated by the police was horrible. There were points where she was lied to. There were points where she was told an arrest was happening, and then, you know, after the fact, she'd be told, no, we didn't arrest him, and wouldn't be told why. They switched her investigators without telling her, and her first investigator would, like, call her up and say, like, I'm really sorry. I don't trust what's going on. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to, like, be seen talking to you. And then things were called off, and then, you know, after all of the evidence, after everything she compiled in this book, you know, their insistence of not charging the man who assaulted her with anything. And so much of the book is focused on that. Like, she says at a point that she doesn't feel any anger or hatred for the man who assaulted her. And it feels like, she doesn't say this explicitly, but it does feel like with the way she wrote this book and the focus that she had in this book, that her anger is mostly resolved for the Japanese police force, for the system around prosecuting rapists. And it does feel like that's where her intention of publishing this book lies. Like, obviously, she wanted him to be prosecuted. She wanted him to receive a trial, and she wanted him to be punished for what he did to her. But mostly she wanted the system changed. Like, she published this book to be about the Japanese system, to be about what happens to women after they report a rape, what happens to them after they go to the police, what happens to them in the media, what happens to them in the long term, about how many are just ignored or treated so badly by the police that they just quietly go away and pretend like they never said anything. And it's really heartbreaking to read. This is a book specifically about Japan and the Japanese justice system. It's translated, but I do feel like it's really relatable around the world. Like, change the details, change, you know, some of the specifics of it. I think people anywhere could relate to this and can see parts of the Japanese justice system in the justice systems where they live. Like, obviously it's different, but like, you do read books like Chanel Miller's book, and it's the same, and it's the same in so many different places, and it really hurts your soul to read. I think this was really wonderful. I think it hit me so hard in the emotions. The main complaint that I did have was that I didn't really enjoy the writing style of this, and I don't know if that was just like the translation of this, because this is a Japanese novel that was translated into English, so I'm always a little bit hesitant when I talk about that, because I don't want to like blame the author or blame the translator when like I really don't know where the issue was. Like, it may have been I didn't connect with the way that Ito wrote this, or it may have been that I didn't like the translation, or the translation wasn't great. I will never know, but I didn't connect with it very well. It did feel very like kind of stilted and awkward for me. Like, I just could never find the flow of the story, and it wasn't very like immersive for me in that way. But it wasn't bad, and I do think I liked, I don't want to say the writing style, because obviously I had a problem with that, but I liked the choices that were made, the narrative choices that were kind of blunt and kind of distant. Like, you could see her sharing her pain and sharing her experiences, but almost distancing herself from it at the same time. I love that. I love that so much. I would highly recommend this book. I think it was well worth the read. I think you learn a lot specifically about the Japanese justice system. Like, I didn't really know anything about it much, so it was interesting to learn that. But I think more than that, this is the story of a woman who was assaulted, of a woman who didn't let that take her voice away, who decided to stand there and speak for all the women who weren't able to say anything about it, and to share her story with the world in the hopes that she could make a difference and she could change some of the bad situations she went through. She talked a lot in this book about her younger sister, and how her younger sister didn't always agree with her going to the press and sharing her story and writing this book, and it caused a lot of problems in their relationship. But she also talked about how she would never be able to forgive herself if her sister ever went through a similar thing and had to deal with the same power structures in place that she had to deal with and go through all the pain that she had to go through. And I do think that was the focus of this book, was her sharing her story in order to make the world a better place, in order for changes to happen within the justice system. And I don't know anything about Japan or changes that were made, but I do think some changes were made after this, so that's wonderful. But I would highly recommend this book. It was such a worthwhile read, and I think she has a very powerful story to tell. Let me know down below if you've read Black Box and what you thought of it if you have, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.